like to put people in categories, right? In high school, junior high, same kind of thing. You got jocks, you got nerds, you got band kids, you got drama kids, you got the emo kids. We had goth kids when I was in school. They were the ones that would put glue in their hair and make it stand up. I remember a kid that put Elmer's glue in his hair to get it, the tallest mohawk he could. Like we want that identity. And I don't know if you can think back, if you can remember that far. Dennis isn't in here, but everybody else probably can. If you can remember back that far, can you remember anybody that wasn't in a category? We like our categories. And if you're not in a category, we try to push you into one. We have categories of in high school, we do that. We have categories of sin, right? There's some sins that are like, yeah, this is wrong, but I get it. And there's some sins like, oh, no, we would never do that. We want to categorize things. We look at the people around us. So you look at politics and you put yourself in a category, right? You put yourself in the good guy category and other people in the bad guy category. And if you're nuanced about it, you've got the good guys, the bad guys who are bad not because they believe bad things, but because they're corrupt. And then the people in the middle who are well-intentioned but wrong, right? You've got yourself and then everybody else in a nice, neat little category. We like to know our categories so that we know who we are. If I don't have a category, who am I? If I don't have a category, I don't know what to do. And we'll embrace those categories even though we don't like them. I wanted to quit band for a long time. I did not like my band director. I don't know if you got that from last week. I did not like him or his wife, who was the assistant. I didn't like either one of them. But I stayed in that. Why did I stay in that? Because if I wasn't that, who was I? We like our categories, and that doesn't stop in childhood. It comes all the way through. We get categories in church too. We like to group everybody else into a certain kind of category. You got the people that don't think it matters all that much, so they show up if they get nagged into it, right? You got those people. You categorize other people and you say, well, these people know it's important, but they don't think it's important enough to miss other things, so they'll be there as long as they didn't stay up too late or they didn't have too busy of a weekend or there's not something else they want to do, right? You got that category. You got categories of people who say, well, this really matters. I know it matters. My grandma told me it matters. I believe Jesus in this. It really matters. But they think of church as a service to them, right? They show up, they give their money, the church provides a service to them. You've got people that think it really matters, and they're going to show up every time. They're going to be there because they know it matters, but they think they have no value. They have nothing to contribute, so they just try to take up as little space as possible and leave as quickly as possible so that they don't bother the people that actually have something to offer. That's where they put themselves. You got the people that show up every time, and they're the core, and this is their whole identity as this church. You got the category of people that are pastors and somehow separate from everybody else. We make all these categories. And there are categories, for sure. Even in a church, there are categories of people. But they're not the categories that we make up, right? We could go through and you might describe your category differently than I did, but you would put yourself in a category of one of those groups of people. But Peter, and I would think after 16 sermons, I would be able to say Peter without thinking about it and not saying Paul. Peter, at the end of 1 Peter, is wrapping up this whole letter that he's written. He's talked about all these things. He's talking to these people that have nobody but each other. And he says, there are categories of people in a church, but they're not what you think they are. And you need to know what they are, because whichever category in determines how you should function in that church. So we're going to read in 1 Peter chapter 5. We're going to start in verse 1. We're just going to go through 5 verses, and we're going to just talk through this today. So in 1 Peter 5, chapter 1, verse 1, chapter 5, verse 1. It says, so I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. Stop right there. Don't go on. He gives us our first category right here. We're going to talk through this in just a minute, but he gives us our first category here, right here. I don't know if you can spot it or not. The first category that he gives us is elder. And if you grew up Baptist, especially conservative, stubborn, independent, and I don't mean independent fundamentalist, but I just mean American independent Baptist. When you read the word elder, you think pastor, right? And if you grew up with somebody somewhere else, maybe you grew up in a Protestant denomination, you've got all these, when you think elder, you might think elder board. And you think the group of volunteer men who run the church. Maybe you think deacon or something along those lines. Maybe you don't have any exposure to any of that and you think old person when you see elder. Whatever it is, you're probably not getting all of it. Because it is talking about older, probably more maturity than age. It's talking about pastors for sure. It is talking about the leadership in the church, but it's a bigger category than we think it is. Now, we can read this, and a lot of people read this, and they just apply these next verses and say, okay, this is talking to pastors, but I don't believe that's what he's talking about. I don't think he's just saying, hey, pastors, do these things. Because in verse 5, let's just read what verse 5 says. Likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. So he's either talking about a larger group of people than just pastors and saying that there are two categories, the older and the younger, or he's saying, young people, obey your pastor. That's what he's saying. And leaving everybody else to do whatever they want to. And that's what he's doing. Because when we go back to verse 1, you look at that, and he says, I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder. He's saying, I'm in this category. And if he was talking about pastors, what he would say is, as an apostle, I command you, pastors. But he says, no, I'm in this category too, because there's only two categories, the elder and the younger. And as an elder, I'm telling you to do this. So I don't want you to read this today and say, well, he's not talking to me because he's just talking to pastors. Peter's view of this is not there are pastors and there's everybody else, but his view are there are leaders, some of whom are pastors, and there are those who are following. And we're going to talk about what defines those two categories in just a minute. So we're going to talk about this in relationship to pastors, but I want you to know you're not excluded from this because you're not a pastor. That's not what he's talking about. So let's see what he actually says here in verse 1. I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. So Peter says, all right, this is for the elders, which I'm going to tell you is the more mature people in the church, the people that are a little bit further along. You might be 80 and be an elder, but if you just got saved last year, you're probably not an elder in this category. This is people who are further along in their walk with God. As one of those people who's further along in the walk with God, and it's really cool what Peter does here because Peter himself was the leader among the apostles. He's the first among equals. He's not a pope, but he's the first among equals. He's the one out in the front speaking. He's the one that's always doing stuff, but he doesn't elevate himself above everybody else. But he says, I'm in this category too. I'm with you too. And if I can humble myself enough to do what I'm about to tell you to do, then I don't know how any of you are going to argue with me because, again, I'm Peter and you're not. As one of you, as someone who watched the sufferings of Jesus, as someone who's going to share in the reward that comes when Jesus comes back, I tell you these things, you who are more mature, you who are on that dividing line of you're more mature, you've been here for a while, you understand how things work, this is what I tell you. Verse 2. Shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you do, not for shameful gain, but eagerly, not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. You can see why I said most people think this is about pastors, right? Because this sounds a lot like pastors, but he doesn't give us pastors and everybody else. He says the elders and the younger. I don't know why. It would make me feel better if we could say youngers, but then that doesn't make any sense. So we got the elders, of which I'm a category, in this category too. This is how you should behave. Whether you're a pastor who's on staff and being paid, or you're just a more mature person who's following Jesus, this is how you behave. I want to talk to you through these verses twice, okay? I want to look at these twice, and first I want to apply this to pastors, and then I want to apply it to you. Now, this is weird for me because I'm about to tell you how to judge me. It feels like I'm going to preach a sermon about how I need a raise or I'm leaving and you need to hire somebody else as this is what you look for. I am not leaving unless God makes me. Okay? I don't want you to think that. And as much as I am always down for a raise, as the guy who also helps watch the money and make recommendations, probably don't do that right now. Okay? This is what he says. Let's talk first of all to pastors. If you want to look, should you trust your pastor? How should a pastor behave? God forbid you get transferred somewhere else, and you have to go to another church and you're looking for something else. What should you look for in a pastor? He says this, shepherd the flock of God that is among you. This word shepherd is used a lot. It's used to describe what a pastor should be like and how we should lead. If you dealt with cows at all, which I've dealt with cows enough to know I'm fine not dealing with cows. If you've dealt with cows you know it's hard to lead cows unless you've got a bucket of feed, right? If you've got a bucket, they think there's something in there and they will follow you. You have to lie to them to get them to follow you. That's how that works if you've got cows. And eventually they realize there's nothing in there and you have to drive them, right? Nobody ever went on a cattle lead from Texas to Kansas City. That's never happened. You go on a cattle drive to get them to the stockyards. That's how it works. Cows have to be driven. And a lot of pastors want to drive. They want to stand at the back and they want to harass and they want to yell and they want to push you to go the right direction. And that will work, but the cows are never happy about it. And it hurts the cows. That's just how it works. They lose a lot of weight from Fort Worth to Kansas City. But the word that's always used to describe a pastor is shepherd. To work with sheep, unless you're a dog who drives them from behind. Shepherds have a relationship with the sheep trust them, and they walk, and the sheep follow. Sometimes you get a stubborn one, and you have to go get them. But most of the time, the sheep will follow the shepherd. And when he describes what a pastor should be like, it's never someone who yells and guilts and harasses until the church does what they should do. But it's always someone who does what needs to be done and invites others to follow. When he says this is what pastors should be like, he describes them as shepherds, people who lead from the front, who lead by example. And he says, look, I want you to lead the flock that is among you. He doesn't set pastors aside and say that you're something different, but rather it's like the sheep that's in charge of the other sheep. This is the flock that's among you, your people that you're with. You should lead them, and the way that you get them to work is by teaching them and setting the example for them. It's a trend right now, and this is not just a trend right now. You could look at this, it's just on the internet a lot right now. But there has been a trend forever that when a pastor gets in a leadership position, he wants to treat it like a leadership position in the world. He wants to get special privileges. He wants to do less of the work than everybody else. Right now, he wants to have a green room where he sits in the back and prays or looks at his phone, one or the other, while everybody else does all the work to prepare for worship. And then he comes out and he preaches a sermon to great acclaim, and then he goes out to sign books until everybody goes home and he can be done, right? But that is never how it's described. That the pastor is a shepherd who leads from the front of his people. And that you're able to follow him, not because he told you what to do, but because you've watched him do what the Bible teaches to do, and you can follow him because of that trust. Shepherd the flock of God that is among you. Exercising oversight, right? Oversight is a very different kind of word than boss. This is not someone who goes and tells everyone what to do, but someone who watches over the people around them. To look for problems, to look for somebody that's falling behind, to gently encourage them to follow, to sometimes to have to be pretty harsh and open and frank about what's going on, but to get people to follow because he's shepherding and he has oversight over them. But he should not do this under compulsion, but willingly. He should not gripe about this all the time. I have a hard time dealing with somebody who gripes about everything all the time. I just get tired of it. I want to go to another room. I understand things are not great. I understand this is hard. But you wear me out griping about stuff all the time. And a pastor who spends all his time complaining about the things that he has to do, rather than doing it and setting the example of how you do this, I don't want to be around that guy. I've never gotten to pick a pastor before or choose a church before based on the pastor, but if I was you, I wouldn't go to somebody who complained all the time. Somebody who didn't want to do the things that needed to be done. And if he did it, he was going to let you know he didn't want to do it done. I'm not going to lie to you and say, I really enjoy this task that I don't like. I'm not going to lie to you, but I'm going to try to do it with a good attitude. I may tell you I don't like it, but I'm going to try to do it with a good attitude. Because you're not going to want to follow me or be around me if I gripe and complain about everything all the time. You just don't want to be around that kind of person. Don't do this under compulsion, being forced to do it, but willingly, as God would have you do it. That it's not just about doing the job that God's given you to do, but that your pastor does the job that God gives him to do and does it the way that God would have him do it. And if all you care is about checking the box and not how you check the box, you're not going to have success in this. Not for shameful gain, but eagerly. Your pastor, this is so weird. Your pastor should not work for you. I want you to understand that. Your pastor should not work for the church. He should not be somebody who considers himself to be employed by the church, but rather he should consider himself someone who is called by God to serve a church, and that he doesn't go to that church to get paid. It's a scary thing, but I always ask people not to tell me the salary package before I talk to them about whether I was going to go to that church or not. Because I didn't want to consider the salary package as part of my decision. Well, you got to feed your family, you got to pay your bills. That's true. But if God tells me to go do something, am I going to say no to him because the pay's not what I need it to be? My grandfather was a pastor, and he was not very well educated. I think he dropped out in 8th grade, and he always had a very low view of his own intelligence. So he would only go to the small churches that other pastors didn't want. I remember the first time he came to the church that I spent the first 13 years of my life in, he got paid $25 a week. That was in the 70s. Now, $25 a week in 1900, that's pretty good, I guess. In 70s, it's not great. So he worked at a factory to supplement the $100 a month that they gave him. But he knew that he wasn't working for pay. He was working because God had called them there, and he didn't work for that church. He served that church, and that church was responsible to do whatever they could to help him in that. If they can only afford a dozen eggs a month, that's what he works for, and he goes and gets a job somewhere else. And whatever pastor you have, if you are a preacher who's going to be a pastor one day, if you're on that, your calling is not to go work for the church that will pay you, but your calling is to go wherever God leads you and to serve to the best of your ability. And if that means that you got to put on a pair of roller skates and go car hop at Sonic while you do it, that's what you do. If we run out of money, I'm still your pastor. If I have to have another job, I'm still your pastor. Because the pastor who only does this for shameful gain doesn't deserve the job. That being said, you have a responsibility to pay your pastor generously. In 1 Timothy, this is so weird. In 1 Timothy, Paul says this. He says, the pastor who works well is worthy of double honor. That's not twice as many compliments, right? This is the same root word as honorarium. If I go do a wedding or I do a funeral, people give me an honorarium. That's pay for work. It's really not even pay for work. It's a gift for providing something to them. And this is the same root word. So what he's saying when he says the pastor is worthy of double honor, he's not saying you give him twice as many compliments. He's saying he gets paid double. If you got it, you pay him double if he does a good job. Why? Because he's willing to work for nothing. And the pastor who will work for nothing because God called him there, and the church that will pay whatever they can afford to pay out of gratitude for that, is a pastor and a church that will succeed. You pay me generously. Again, I'm never going to turn down a raise, but I'm not asking for one. I'm just preaching through 1 Peter, and this is where we happen to be. So, not for shameful gain. He's not just doing it because he's forced to, because this is his career, because he wants to get paid or he pushes to get paid more. Not domineering over those in your charge. Not being the kind of pastor that's controlling about everything or forces everything to be his own way. He's got to lead. I've got to make decisions, say, sorry, we're not going to do that kind of thing. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do that. But if I don't have to draw a line, I shouldn't draw a line. And that I'm not controlling about everything, but rather allowing each person within their own gifting to thrive so that this church can be what it needs to be. Not just the image of me in greater fashion, but rather the church that Jesus intends it to be, not domineering, not controlling over those in charge, but examples. That if I never preached to you, and if I never preached to you, you should probably get somebody else, but if I never preached to you, if I never taught you, you would still be able to follow Jesus by following my example. When God forbid, the time comes that he says it's time for you to be somewhere else, and you should look for a good preacher. You should for sure do that. But if you have to decide between somebody who's really good at preaching, but you can't follow their example, or someone who preaches the word of God with a lot of effort, but not a lot of skill, but whose example you can follow, choose the example over the skill. The problem with pastors is that if we're good at what we do, and even if we're not good at what we do, there's some of them that are not good at what they do, but they still thrive, right? God still blesses them. It's really easy to get a big head about this stuff. It's really easy to start thinking, I'm going to preach and you're going to obey, and I'm about words and you're about actions. It's really easy to get to that point. And I'm not telling you anything new. You know this. I'm very fortunate in that God has made me okay at what I do and really bad at everything else to humble me continually. I had 0 bites while fishing for 9 hours on Friday. Not a bite. It humbled me greatly. I'm very irritated about it. I prayed that God would at least let Justin catch something. He got one after a while. But the federal government killed all the fish, so that's part of the problem. But God humbles me a lot, and I'm grateful for that, because if not, pride would be my biggest issue. It's really easy to be proud, especially when everybody's looking at you, and even if they don't mean it, they tell you how great you are all the time. But fortunately, God has blessed me with feelings that humble me. So he says they should be examples. And when the chief shepherd appears, they will receive the unfading crown of glory. The pastor that serves well will receive a reward that lasts. Now, when we say crown of unfading glory, this is not a king's crown. This is a Roman laurel, right? You win a race in the Olympic Games, at least at that time, you get a laurel. It's a green crown made of leaves. But he says this is not one that you're just going to wear for a little while and then it's going to rot and fade away, but this is one that will last forever. There's a reward for doing this well because it's difficult. But if you look for a pastor, if you're considering me, if this ever happens to you, look for a shepherd who does it because God has called him and not for the paycheck, who doesn't use it as a platform for his own ego, but uses it to lift you up and to lead you forward. And if you have to choose between talent and example, between skill and example, choose example every time. All right, now let's go back through this. Because when he says this, we go to pastor, but he's not talking just about pastors. Pastors are in this category, but what he's saying is the people who are more mature and the people who are less mature. So how does this apply to you? Well, if you're on the more mature category, if you're in that category, it is your responsibility to help shepherd the flock of God that is among you. It is your responsibility to do this not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you. And we say, well, how am I supposed to shepherd? I'm not a pastor. I'm not even a man. I'm just here. I've been in church for a long time. I feel like I'm pretty mature, but how am I supposed to shepherd anybody? Well, I don't know if you've heard of this thing that we talk about all the time called discipleship. And what discipleship is basically Christian mentoring. It is one person helping another person go further in their relationship with Jesus than they could on their own. It's relationship, a close enough relationship that you can actually share what's going on in your lives. It's applying the teaching that happens around to be able to help you apply it to your life. It's sharing your own failings. It's sharing your example to help them. And it's holding that person accountable to follow Jesus. That's discipleship. And if you take this away from pastors and just put it on the more mature people, what we have here is a command and an example to disciple. That you who are more mature have a responsibility to come alongside those who are less mature to help them follow Jesus better. That you exercise oversight over them. This does not mean that you control their behavior, because you're not in a position to do that. But rather, it's that you have the relationship with them so that you can help hold them accountable, so that you can say, hey, why don't you steer back over this direction a little bit? I wandered over there one time and I fell off a cliff and broke my leg. Why don't you just pull it back in over here a little bit? But that requires effort. It requires work. It requires relationship before you can get to that point. I've had several conversations about people who have glaring issues that need to be dealt with, but they won't let anybody in close enough to be able to help them with those issues. So nobody wants to deal with it. Nobody wants to step up and help. We've got these things that can be easily resolved. Maybe they don't even know they're doing it, or that's a problem that we need to help them with, but nobody has the relationship to do that. It is our relationship, and I say our as in those of us who are more mature, to put work into having the kind of relationship with people that will allow us to exercise oversight to bring them back along. And that's not just me. That's all of us who are on the more mature category. We don't do this under compulsion. We don't do this because Ben is constantly harassing you about how you should be involved in discipleship. You don't do this because everybody's going to think, they're going to think less of you if you don't show up to the men's discipleship night and get in a discipleship group. Not because they're going to think less of you if you're not involved with what the women are doing, but you do it because Jesus is giving you this responsibility as someone in this category to do these things. That you do it willingly as God would have you. That you help those who are further behind than you are to come on ahead. That you do this willingly. Not for shameful gain. Well, I'm not getting paid for anything, so I don't know how I do it for shameful gain, but there is plenty of opportunity for shameful gain on the more mature side of things without any money being involved. When you're the one that's done this for the longest time and you're not going to let anybody else do it, you're not going to let anybody else step in because it's your thing, right? It's your thing, and everybody else is going to mess it up, so you do your thing and don't let anybody else in. A shameful gain. When you do it because you're going to get the credit for it, and it may not get announced from the stage, but everybody else is going to know that you did it. And the reason that's motivating you to do that thing is credit. That's not doing it as Jesus would have you do it. That's doing it for shameful gain. When you do it because it's your thing, and you've always done it, and you're always going to do it, and nobody else gets to butt in on your thing, and you're not going to let anybody else learn because it's your thing and you're going to hold on to it, that's shameful. Shameful gain. When you restrict other people's opportunities to grow because you're protecting your little kingdom. Not for shameful gain, but eagerly discipling, eagerly inviting other people in, eagerly helping people get back on course, eagerly stepping in to have the relationship that will allow you to course correct for people, not domineering over people, not controlling them, but being an example to them. That by following you, they might know how to follow Jesus. Being examples to the flock. And if all of this applies to all who are more mature and not just pastors, then this last verse applies to you as well. The last sentence of that verse. Lane's on it, and more than I am. And no, that is the last verse. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. That there's not just a reward for the pastor who serves well, but there's a reward for any believer who steps up to help disciple and lead others to follow Jesus better. Now we'll go to verse 5. Likewise, you who are younger, again, this is not just about age, it's about maturity. You've got the category of people who are further along, and you got the category of people who are not as far along. Who are younger, be subject to the elders. Peter loves this word subject. He uses it at least 4 times in this book. He uses it when he talks about husbands and wives. He uses it when he talks about citizens and the government. He uses it another time that I cannot remember. And he uses it this time right here. When this word subject, as we've talked about over and over and over again, is not you're inferior, so get in line. But rather he says, you who are equals have different positions. So you who are further ahead, step up and lead, and you who are not as far ahead, follow voluntarily. Not because you're less than, not because you're inferior, but because they're further ahead than you. There's 2 categories, the further ahead and the farther behind. And those who are further ahead sacrifice of themselves to make the others be able to come further ahead. And those who are farther behind have a good attitude about following those who are ahead. And that good attitude doesn't mean when they do it perfectly every time. It doesn't mean when they always get it right. But it means extending grace for when they fail. It means being merciful to their failings. That just because they're further ahead doesn't mean they have it all figured out. And following, understanding that sometimes a shepherd makes a wrong turn, and you got to circle everybody around and go back out. He says, this doesn't work though. This doesn't work at all. If you don't clothe yourselves, all of you, elder, younger, doesn't matter, all of you clothe yourselves with humility towards one another. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's having a proper understanding of who you are. It's putting yourself in the right category. Some people have a hard time with that. Saying, well, this person is further ahead than I am. Like, no, they're not. I've been going to church since I was 2 weeks old. I know as much as they do. I'm as far along as they are. And yet, your actions say that your maturity is not there. And their actions say that it is. You say, well, I'm nothing. I don't have anything to offer anybody. I'm just going to, I almost said sit in the back corner, but I don't want to call Emily out. I'm just going to sit and be quiet because I have nothing to offer anybody. I am not more mature. One of the wisest teachers I've ever sat under was named Max Burrow. Mr. Max never finished high school. I don't think he made it to 6th grade. He was a farmer, worked in a factory, and he could not read. He couldn't read. And so to study for Sunday school, his wife would read to him. And he would hold it all in his head, everything that he was going to say. And then he would stand up there to teach, and he would call on other people to read. And they would read, and he would share wisdom. And that wisdom did not come from his education. It didn't come from his talent. It came from a prolonged period of time with God. And some of you think, I have nothing to offer, so I'm going to put myself in this lesser category. I'm not going to have a right view of who I am and where I'm there. I'm actually going to hold such a high view of my ineptitude that I'm going to put myself in the wrong category and rob other people of what God has given me to offer to them. Humility is not just thinking less of yourself. It's having a proper understanding of who you are in relationship to God and the relationship with the people around you. And part of that humility is saying, I'm going to let down my insecurity. I'm going to let down these things that I think about myself, and I'm going to share what I have, and whatever it is, it is. And it's okay if it's not as good as anybody else's. I've been here longer. I'm going to step up. Clothe yourself with humility toward one another. For God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble. And here's the thing. If you will humble yourself, if you'll get an accurate view of who you are in relationship to God and specifically to everyone else, which is what he says here, then God himself will lift you up. God himself will give you grace. But if you run into this thinking about how much you have to share or how long you've been here or what you've done, God opposes that and pushes you back down. There are 2 categories of people in churches. And it's not about how often you show up. It's not about how much you give. It's not about how well you sing or how much talent you have. It's about this. How far are you in your walk with God? For those of you who are further along, set the example. Do the work of having the relationship with other people so that you can help them come further along. Because you are a gift to our church that God has chosen to give us. And if you choose not to obey as He's commanded you here, then you're withholding that from us. You're not being humble. You're disobeying. And you're robbing us of what God has given us in you. Don't do it for what you're going to get out of it. Don't do it in a domineering way. Don't do it in a controlling way. But set the example humbly so that when other people who don't know the Bible as well, who don't know God as well, when they want to know what to do, they say, what would they do? And they can follow God by following you. Set the example. If you're not as far along, there is no shame in that. It sounds like there is because, well, you're less mature. Maturity is about growth. It's not about value. Beckham is 9. He's 10 now. That's what happens when time passes. Beckham is 10. Cooper is 15. Cooper is generally more mature than Beckham. Doesn't mean he has less value than Beckham. He's had less time. He's had less opportunity. He's had less growth. And if you're in this second category, there's nothing to be ashamed of. It's just the opportunity for you to grow. Everyone who is in the other category was in your category to begin with, has grown through that. I've watched people in this church over the last 5 years move categories because they've allowed themselves to be led. They've allowed themselves to be discipled. They've allowed themselves to be shepherded, and they've grown. So if you're in that second category, follow the example that's set for you. Follow it with grace, because we're going to mess up and we're going to do it wrong. And sometimes the example you're going to follow is how to handle it when you mess it up. Sometimes the example to follow is how to repent when you do it wrong. But give grace to those whose entire lives are set apart to be an example to you. And follow that example. But thirdly, be humble enough to know when and which and when. Because here's the thing about these two categories, they kind of float, right? Depending on which room you're in, you might be in one category or the other. Again, Beckham is 10, and so nobody's going to put him in charge of the business meeting. He's not going on the finance committee, not doing any of that. No one in this room would put him in the more mature category. But Copeland and Carter do. To them, because of the room that he's in, he falls into one category. When he comes in here, he's in another category. Because it's not about passing a mark. It's not about reaching a certain grade level or getting a certification. It's about how far are you in your walk with Jesus. And there are some rooms that you're going to be in that you are far and away the furthest ahead. And when you go to work, there's a good chance that you are far and away the furthest ahead. In your small group, you may be far and away the furthest ahead. But you walk into another group and you are the farthest behind. Because it's not about passing a mark or a certification or any of that. It's about who the people around you are. So be humble enough to know that sometimes you're the elder and sometimes you're the younger. And have the attitude that allows you to swap back and forth. Brother Verlin is David Wood's dad. He's 77, I think. Been pastoring since he was in his early 20s. So let's go with 55 years he's been pastoring. I might be significantly further along than you are, But he's got 37 years on me. And when I sit in that lodge and Brother Verlin talks, I'm going to be quiet. Because he is the elder and I am the younger. And I have to be humble enough to recognize the difference. So we should put people in categories in this church. But we should put them in the categories that God has determined for us. Not the category of less than or less valuable or more valuable, but the category of further ahead or farther behind. And when we're further ahead, we step up and set the example. We shepherd, we sacrifice. And when we're further behind, we voluntarily, not because of a less value, but because we're in a different position, we put ourselves subject to the one ahead of us that we might follow. Peter does not say, I'm an apostle, so this doesn't count for me. You know, we apostles, we hung out with Jesus a lot. He asked me if I loved him 3 times. I said yes every time. This is me. I'm separate from you people. He said, I call on you who are more mature, of whom I am one, to humbly set the example for others to follow. That all of us might be more mature on the day of Jesus' return than we were when we started. Some of you are rather aged, but maybe you've not taken your relationship with Jesus seriously. It's time to start. Some of you are still pretty young, and you think you've got time before you have to start that. It's time to start. Some of you don't know Jesus at all. That you've gone to church and you've done these things, but you've never just turned yourself over to him and said, I can't do this. I need you to do this. You are the only one who can. And it's time for you to start. Because every day that passes is a day closer to his return, is a day less that you have to grow. So let's start today. Find someone that God puts on your heart and say, hey, let's spend some time together. Let me buy you lunch. Let's go to coffee. Let me get to know you well enough that I can actually obey Jesus in that. Some of you need somebody to step up to, somebody to follow along beside. And I'm going to pray that God puts them on your heart and you can go to them and say, hey, I really admire you. I think you're somebody I'll learn from. Can we go to coffee? Can we go to lunch? Can we spend some time together because I have some questions? You can either do that or you can continue to hide and pretend you're fine just the way you are. What will you decide? Because the decision is entirely yours. Stand with me, please. Our Heavenly Father, we come before you right now, and I'm so grateful that you do not create a system wherein we pass a test and now we're good. But rather, you said we are all sinners, that we have all earned death and hell, and we are all separate from God, and that you came to rescue us not on our own merit, but on yours. And that anyone who recognizes they're a sinner, who believes that you're the only Son of God, and who cries out to you can receive that same rescue and salvation. I thank you, Lord, that you don't just get us there and say, all right, you're good now. Wait for me to come back, but rather you push us to grow. You push us to achieve this goal that you have for us. You push us to be more like you, and you give us a church to help with that. And I ask that we would live up to the responsibility that you've given us. That we would be humble enough to know who we are, where we are, and what category we fall into and when we fall into it. That when the time comes that it is our responsibility to set the example, that we would step up and lead, not through commands, not domineeringly, but by example. And when it's time for us to follow, That we would set aside the pride that tells us we were fine, we're just as good as them, we know just as much as them. We would set that aside and follow. And that by walking together, we would walk closer to you. Thank you, Lord. And it's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.